Everybody thinks that long-term predicting is impossible because there's so much that could change. Short-term is where everything can change because all types of things can happen in politics and the weather, and a war could break out. I mean, tons of things. The long-term is what is down to a few variables and can be projected out decades or longer. So that was my big wake-up point. Oh my gosh, I can be the first person to start projecting long-term trends with confidence. And literally back there, I mean, my early stage, I was predicting that the baby boom would be larger than anything ever seen and would peak exactly. And I wasn't trying to be that exact, but it would peak at the end of 2007, which it did. And then we had the 2008 crash. And that's when something changed big time, which has been very difficult to adjust to. Governments decided they can't take that. In other words, that 2008 was the beginning of the next Great Depression. And guess who was the Federal Reserve Chairman at that time? Ben Bernanke, whose thesis was the Great Depression. He saw 2008 like I did. He's like, oh my God, this is the beginning of a depression. It follows a bubble boom like the Roaring '20s, and then the flushing out of all those bubbles and financial assets stuff and loss of wealth and stuff causes a depression. And my gosh, the economy is going to be horrible for a decade. So we've been living off of massive stimulus, 27 trillion now I've counted up and still growing ever since. People got to realize we were heading 2008 into recently 2022-23, a major long-term downturn in generational spending until the millennials came along, and they've just started to turn us up in 2024. And what the government did was just blow our way out of it by just printing money and running huge deficits to make up for the slowing economy. So the economy never got to adjust back and flush out the bad debts and the zombie companies, which recessions are a very useful thing. They're not a bad thing. What people need to learn is if you want not to have a terrible recession, have a healthy boom and don't let debts and things get out of control in the boom. But you have to have recessions. You have to grow and then eliminate. You can't just straight line grow forever. And that's the problem with the central banks and these economists who've never had sex or run a business, at least look like they never had sex. And they're running the economy saying, we got to grow at 3% a year with 1 to 2% inflation. And if not, we'll pump it up. And if we grow too fast, we'll slow it down. They're telling free market capitalism what to do. Well, guess what? That's not free market capitalism anymore. And I've studied history, so I know how slow progress was before free market capitalism met democracy in the late 1700s. Adam Smith was the visionary of free market capitalism. He called it the invisible hand. That is so right. It's the bottoms up. If you really structure an economy properly, with all the systems and information access and rules to make sure people aren't cheating, you let the economy grow from all the innovations at the bottom up, and you let the economy weed out the losers. You don't try to pick and win, and choose the losers. And that system has worked unbelievably. I mean, when I look at human history in the last 300,000 years, and particularly since the late 1800s when it just exploded, I mean, we've had more progress economically in our standard of living in the last 125 years than tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of years before that in human history. I mean, that's how big the age we're in, because we finally figured out something important, and it was how to structure systems to leverage the innovation of individual people instead of all putting them on factories and having them be morons and just do simple tasks and do what they're told. And you couldn't do that until information and education was high enough. So this all came together naturally. People don't realize our standard of living is 10x of our great-great-grandparents at the turn of the 1900s, the early part of the last century. 10x! That's never happened in history in 125. It's just amazing breakthrough. And now we take it for granted and everybody, oh my God, we can't have a recession. Ridiculous. Wake up. Recessions are what stimulate innovation. You know how I learned that in my first assignment, my first big turnaround? This company been going along, the founder, getting more and more missing the markets, making mistakes until they get in trouble. When they get in trouble, I come in and in 6 months make more change in that company in a crisis than I could have made in the next 6 years just doing it incrementally so it's okay with everybody. Change is what causes innovation, and change is accelerated by crises. There's nothing wrong We have crises. We have thunderbolts. Disturbances and challenges are what cause us to innovate and grow. And everybody instead wants a nice, safe life and everything protected and all that. And that's how you basically kill an economy and kill a system. Everybody should have enough security to be able to learn and feel good and not be operating out of daily fear. But you need a dynamic system. And that's what free market capitalism. That's the secret. It's a self-correcting, self-regulating, dynamic system that grows from the bottoms up on its own. The biggest cycle that when I started digging into long-term research, people like Robert Prechter and James Dale Davidson were looking at this 500-year mega inflation cycle. Okay, so I started digging into that. Inflation's a bad word. Oh, inflation's bad. You got to lick it. You got to whip inflation. The greatest progress in history happened in those inflationary periods because we were expanding into new industries. We were moving into more specialization of labor, which means everybody focuses more so they can be 10x more productive, and then delegates a lot of the other tasks to people that focus on what they do so we can all have a higher standard of living. And that higher standard of living, inflation is a leading indicator of that, outside of some war or short-term crisis. So another thing I discovered earlier, inflation is a sign of progress, not an evil to be attacked. What did the 70s inflation? It was the baby boomers just entering the workforce at great expense with all their new innovations and ideas. And now we're seeing the fruits of that. All those new innovations move mainstream, and all those baby boomers making way more money than their parents, and driving a much more dynamic, higher value-added growing economy. Again, everything was telling me the easiest thing is predicting long-term trends once you can establish where you are in a demographic cycle, a generation cycle, and where you are on an S-curve in technology. And that's what I discovered. That after that 0 to 10% on the S-curve, the rest of it's a piece of cake. It's like an automaton. I don't care who wins this election. I have a preference, but I don't care. None of these presidents, unless you're in a major crisis like the early 30s, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Reagan in the early 80s, those are the people that make a difference, just like me running it. I could make a big difference in the companies I walked into because they were in a crisis, not because I was so smart, because they were in a crisis. And if you do the right things in a crisis, you can make a big difference rather than when you're on top. But once a boom gets going off, there's not much that's going to, unless you get World War III or something like that. Or if COVID had turned into something much more deadly, that could have interrupted. And it did interrupt for a very short period of time, but not for long. So the lesson is the long term is more predictable than the short term within certain, reasonable parameters. And I still can't get people to believe that. People think, no, you don't get it. So anything could happen. No, anything's not going to happen. And I was the first one to predict. The first thing I did walking into these CEO groups, it was called Tech. It's now Vistage. Everybody's like, oh my gosh, Japan's going to take us over. We're losing industries. And I said, no, folks. Japan is taking over our old, mature, slowing, and least profitable industries. We're still dominating. Who dominates Hollywood? U.S., no competition. Japan and China couldn't make a movie if you gave them $1 trillion, okay? Europeans don't even make good movies. Europeans don't even have good music if you get outside of the UK. I was stunned when I first went to Europe and traveled the continent and listened to radio. I'm like, what are these people for? I hate to say this, but so the U.S. and North America has been a big driver of this innovation revolution. And like I say, what the S-curve tells you, somebody's got to innovate it, prove it, and then it will spread to broader and broader markets until everybody has it. So imagine by 2070 or something, most of the world is now urbanized, and most of the world has a standard of living that's maybe closer to 40% of the US and Europe instead of 5 or 10%. It's going to be huge. And we can project which countries win. They're on their own S-curves in urbanization. They're on their own they all have their own generation waves, which are often similar but different. We can project it by country. I can even go down to zip codes if I had to. What most systems do is dig in deeper and try to protect the past and find a way to slide through it and somehow survive. And they don't let the change work its magic, and therefore they kill the system long term. So that's the problem. That's what we've been doing in the economy since 2008-9. Printing money to relieve the symptoms of a depression, to make economy still growing at 2 to 3%, with now inflation down to 2 to 3%, and make it easy. And what we're doing is we're probably going to suffer from lower innovation rates for decades to come from this. And that's why, to me, I've been secretly praying that this economy wins, that something does go wrong like COVID and governments do lose control and the economy breaks down, because only in this breakdown can we flush out the bad debts and the zombie companies. All I do now in my newsletter is preach recessions. It doesn't mean we try to make the worst recessions possible, but recessions are part of the process and they are good for the economy up to a point. So quit fighting them blindly, acting like they're the devil or something. Most people don't realize it, because one thing, you catch a flu, that's something you fight. That's an outside thing that got in your body. You have to fight, like your body has to fight it, and you can help your body fight. Most common colds are your body just getting toxic and saying, hey, I got to take a little break here and get rid of some of these toxins so you can stay healthy. You know what people do? Pour down the cough syrup and kill the process of cleaning out the body. And then they stay sick, and then they get another cold 2 weeks from now and have to take the cough syrup again. Next thing you know, they're a cough syrup addict. This is what happened. Now we are money printing addicts. If the government doesn't run nonstop deficits and print more and more money, the economy will fall into a downturn, and we'll say, oh my gosh, we can't have that. And we'll keep doing it until we blow up. That's why an artificial policy like this, yes, you can stop a recession. Look how long we put it off for 15 years without a recession. The longest we ever went was 9.5 between 90 and 2000, okay? Farther back you go in history, we used to have 3 recessions a decade, okay? 15 years without, and people say, well, that's great. No, I say that's terrible. The economy has got to be really, got a lot of cholesterol and fat and all that, because it hasn't been able to clean itself out. Well, you cannot clean house when you're busy growing at 100 miles an hour. And that's why recessions are normal up to a point, and recessions are healthy up to a point. And fighting them like we're doing now is bad for the economy. The greatest empires, Roman Empire, Greek, whatever, you go back, they always get complacent, and then they always fail from their own complacency. People get, well, let's play more, and let's take more vacations, and let's drink at work. Why work so, whatever. Let's overexpand. Oh, we can't have recession, so every time one comes, we'll just blow it out, with all this printed money, And basically, we're all high, and people don't make good decisions when they're high on take any drug, okay? You take a drug that makes you high and speeds you up or slows you down and makes you whatever creative. It may make you creative, but your judgment goes right out the window on most of these things. So we're basically showing the signs by reacting to the economy this way of a maturing society like the Roman Empire. And when I look at the demographics at the same time, you get the other obvious thing from history that nobody sees. Affluence causes people to be happier and have fewer kids. When people get affluent enough, they say, well, gosh, my kid could get into Harvard or Stanford or some nice college. Well, if I want my kids to get into college, I can't have 6 or 7 kids. I got to have 1 or 2, maybe 3 max. So people have fewer kids and educate them better. Well, that's great for the family. That's great for that kid. What does that do for the economy? Slows the very growth that's been driving it. Rising numbers of households entering the workforce at age 20, earning and spending more money till age 46, and then maturing and becoming the investors that invest in the next generation and keep the cycle going. But through them, when this dam finally burst after holding it back this much and building up this much water, you're only a bigger avalanche. I think actually we're past the point, Depression era from 2008 to 23, when demographics would say you're going to have a major downturn in like a depression. We're actually in a moderate, but an upturn period again from 2024 to 37 with the millennials until they kind of plateau out early. And I think we're going to have a Great Depression during that, what would have been a natural boom, which means the baby boomers have killed the economy for our millennial kids. And they're going to hate us more than they already hate us.